I think in terms of the Ugandan economy, let's put it in context. First of all, the economy is doing reasonably well. I mean, it's been growing at about 7–8% over the last decade. So I think that's quite good. But then if we are realistic, the potential for the economy is much more than the 7–8% growth that we have seen. What are those bottlenecks that have prevented the economy from realizing its greater potential? I think one is infrastructure. Clearly, the infrastructure bottleneck in terms of roads, in terms of the railway, in terms of power supply, these have really hampered the potential that the economy can grow at. The second one is human resources. We've got to make sure that we have the right skills in the economy. Okay, we're turning out a lot of graduates and the educational system, but are the right skills and the right type of people coming out of the university that can then power the economy? I think that's something to look at. The other area, of course, is regional integration. Clearly, a small market like Uganda, there's only so much that you can do. But by making sure that the East African integration is accelerated and the market is wider, I think there will be many more opportunities for this economy to grow. In terms of sectors, clearly oil now has become a huge potential for Uganda's economy. I think if the oil sector grows, it has the potential to really accelerate economic growth. But we've got to be very careful that we do not let oil overshadow other sectors of the economy, particularly agriculture. I think as we grow the oil sector, we've got to be mindful that agriculture, industry, services, other sectors of the economy are equally important, and we've got to have a very balanced growth strategy. In terms of employment, how do you solve the unemployment problem? Okay, I think there are three broad sectors, if I may say so. There is, of course, the public sector, that is government, and I think there's only so much that really you can expect government employment to generate. Then there's the formal private sector. Okay, that's the banks, the insurance companies, the manufacturing companies, and then you have the informal sector, the self-employed. I think future growth has to come from the private sector as well as self-employment, people creating jobs in the informal sector. That is where I see the growth. So for that to happen, of course, if the economy grows, if you see the oil sector, for instance, growing, manufacturing growing, the services sector growing, we'll absorb more and more people into the workforce. But if you also get people who get trained in skills like carpentry and masonry and welding and all these other areas where they can actually work for themselves if the need arises, clearly that's also a source of employment.
I've never thought of a political career. However, if I were to think of a political career, like I've lived my life, I would like to focus. I would focus on improving the infrastructure. I think a lot has been said about that. I would focus on improving health. I would focus on improving the education environment. Now, I know that that is an overused cliche because that's what everybody says. However, I feel that as a nation, we've failed to specialize. And the reason I say that is one of the things that Uganda is good at is the whole issue around agriculture. Now, if you look at the agriculture sector, it is fragmented, in my opinion. It is, we've got a God-given nature reserve of very good soils, water, and that sort of thing. And you find that for a long time, we specialize in things like coffee. That is no longer a specialty. We used to have very good cotton. We haven't specialized. We produce a lot of food, but much of that food is, wasted or even not transported there. So, personally, if I were, to answer that particular question, to try and resolve Uganda's problems, I would say that I would concentrate on the agriculture side, right? Notwithstanding the other facets I've said of infrastructure, education, and health. I would concentrate on agriculture to make it mechanized and to begin doing some large-scale farming. And if that were the concentrate, we would then be able to, provide everybody with the food that they require within this region. But because we'll also have dealt with the infrastructure side, we'll be able to transport all that material. We will have the scientists through education, and we'll have the health through the labor that actually is on these farms. So you can see that although we've found a focus on agriculture, we've been able to utilize some of these major facets to be able to actually propel us as the great nation that we should be in this particular region, using our God-given comparative advantage, which we've not been able to resolve. Now, I'm sure it's a lot harder than that, but if I were to have my wish list, that's what I would say. How does that address the issue of employment? As you can see, we are creating a pool of people and also creating an economy that begins to work. Because if you look at the village, what is their biggest problem? They've got goods and services, but they have not monetized those goods and services because we do not have, a large enough commercial farming enterprise to generate wages, which then turn into consumption, which then turn into monetizing the output out of that agriculture. So Mr. Joe Byarugaba in Bwizibera has his matoke, and he's perhaps not selling it because he's doing it on a small scale, and therefore ends up perhaps buttering it rather than converting that into the commerce. So that would be my sort of thing. Focus, and then use that infrastructure to basically then thrive.
In my career, I worked in the public sector in the Gambia. I worked in the National Investment Board. Then I worked in a parastatal, the Gambia Airlines, and then I worked in Standard Chartered Bank, which is a private sector. I think during that period, I've had some pivotal moments. One, of course, was when I joined the airline, it was at the verge of bankruptcy, and I didn't have any experience running an airline. I came from the National Investment Board and given a challenge of turning around a failing airline. I think what I learned there was, one, it's important to believe in yourself, and two, it's important to get people behind you to help you to succeed. We helped to turn the airline around with the support of the people, and it's still going strong. But I think the lesson there was really one of believing, because if I had any doubts, can I really do it? I think from there it would have been downhill. But I think that belief, that confidence that you have in yourself, and then getting the support of people to help you, I think that's very critical. The other thing that I have found very important is you've got to raise people's expectations. You see, there is always a lot more that we can do as individuals, as an organization, that we believe in, okay? That we think we are capable of doing. So I think getting people to aspire for higher heights, and believing that they can actually get there. I think that's very important. So in my career, when I came to Standard Chartered Bank Uganda, for instance, it was doing maybe 17, 18 million dollars in profit. Now it's doing almost 3 times higher than that. So I think one of the attributes, one of the reasons I attribute that to is that belief that we can do a lot more than what we are doing currently, and getting people to buy into that and then help to deliver.
My career has actually evolved sort of nicely, and I think a little bit of background needs to be put into it. I got into banking by accident, and the accident, ironically, appeared to have been created by Bank of Uganda's inefficiency. I've said that before in public, so there's no reason why I can't. I left university at a time when the currency of Uganda was very bulky. In other words, if you were to deposit money into a bank, you needed a couple of sacks to do that. They probably do so now, but not in the extent that they used to in our time, in the times I started. So my bank at the time was looking for temporary people to actually count money, because what used to happen is customers would bring in their cash, and we would hold this money in the dungeon, and as and when we would count it, we would credit the customer's account, which is a very inefficient way. Sometimes it would take even a month before the money was counted. So they were looking lots of labor, and those days there were no note counting machines. So that's how I got into banking. And I found that it was a fulfilling job, but it had one little problem. It was very repetitive. So I then joined, but I found that if you added value to it, you might succeed. So get into a job which is repetitive, but add value to it. So how did I add value to it? I started trying to learn what everybody else was doing within the bank so that I could. But I also found that I liked doing projects. So I got onto a project which enabled me to then expand my horizon from just being somebody who looks after money into setting up branches. That was the first project that I was involved in. That became quite interesting. But because I also had this numeracy background, I found that strategy was a nice way of getting to learn about what happens in the whole bank. So how do you do strategy? You have to be in the finance department. But because I liked numbers, I then ended up in the finance department. So first moment, move out of mainstream banking, going into strategy. Second moment, good at that, I got recommended. In fact, I got sent to England on a secondment. And that was an experiment too, because they were trying to test how Africans would react as expatriates. So they sent me as an experiment. So I ended up going to London, where then I had to complete my exams to become a qualified accountant. But then as part of that, I found that IT was becoming very interesting, especially from the financial point of view. So I got onto a project which does IT. So I have now got strategy onto my CV. I have now got IT onto my CV. Then I got into London for about 3 years. That was becoming a little bit boring. So I told myself, I need to understand how actually a bank works. So I got a transfer back into Uganda to actually run consumer banking. Now, consumer banking is the heart of banking. So that is the last stage of my sort of career, because now I know strategy, I know IT, I know how a consumer bank works. So I actually know the entire loop in which a bank works. And at that stage, I was then ready for general management. And as everybody then knows, I then left Standard Chartered Bank, which had given me all this all-round experience, to get into general management at Nile Bank, turning it around, going into selling it to Barclays, then going into Global Trust Bank, which also needed a turnaround situation, and then ending up here now at NSSF. So, to summarize it, build the building blocks of your career so that by the time you get into general management, you've got all those building blocks that enable you to look at an enterprise its entirety.